Thomas Andrews built the Titanic. He knew every rivet, every bulkhead, every calculation that held her together. And on the night of April 14th, 1912, within minutes of the collision, he was already doing the arithmetic in his head. Compartments flooding, waterline rising, time remaining. He arrived at his answer before anyone else aboard had even accepted there was a question. The ship had, at most, 2 hours. And then he folded his notebook, set down his pencil, and told almost no one. Not because he was cruel. Because he understood something the rest of the ship had not yet grasped, that the very systems designed to inspire confidence had made the truth almost impossible to believe. Titanic carried enough lifeboats to satisfy every regulation on the books. She had passed every inspection. Her captain had crossed this ocean more times than most men cross a city. Every reasonable person aboard had every reasonable reason to feel safe. So why, when the water was already rising through the mailroom, were passengers still finishing their card games? And while you are down there, I am genuinely curious. Was the sinking of the Titanic a failure of individuals, or a failure of the systems those individuals were trained to trust? But before our journey begins, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight. It is just before midnight on April 14th, 1912, and Thomas Andrews is walking the lower decks of the Titanic with a lantern and a clipboard, and he already knows. The sea is coming in through places it was never supposed to reach. He does not run. He does not shout. He moves from compartment to compartment, with the measured pace of a man completing a calculation he wishes were wrong. The lantern swings slightly as he walks. The corridor is still dry here, and the sound of his footsteps carries in the way that sounds carry in enclosed spaces at night, precise, unhurried, slightly too loud. He passes a row of cabins. Behind one of the doors, someone is still asleep. He does not stop. He is not here to wake anyone. He is here to measure. Andrews is 49 years old, and he has spent the better part of a decade inside this ship, not visiting it, not inspecting it. Inside it, in the way that an architect is inside a building before it is built, carrying its dimensions in his memory, knowing the load-bearing decisions and the compromises and the calculations that produced every wall and every weld. He designed the Titanic in the sense that a composer writes a symphony. Not just the melody, but the structure beneath it, the intervals and the proportions that make the whole thing cohere. He knows where the bulkheads run. He knows their heights. He knows because he decided how high they were built and why, and what they were designed to resist and for how long. He is about to discover that he knows too much. In the boiler rooms forward, the water is already knee-deep and rising. The firemen who worked these spaces an hour ago have retreated aft, and the sea has taken their place with the patient indifference of a thing that does not know it is winning. Andrews holds the lantern lower and watches the water move. It does not surge. It does not crash. It simply rises, the way water always rises when it has found an opening and has all the time in the world. He notes the compartment. He notes the level. He moves on. The Titanic is 882 feet long. She displaces 46,000 tons. She carries in her hull 16 watertight compartments, separated by bulkheads that can be sealed from the bridge by the throw of an electric switch, and were, within seconds of the collision, by an officer who knew exactly what to do. The system worked perfectly. The switches through. The doors closed. And it does not matter, because the damage runs along the starboard side in a pattern that no one anticipated, and the mathematics do not forgive. Andrews has been doing the arithmetic in his head since the moment he understood the shape of the wound. 5 compartments are open to the sea. The Titanic was designed to survive 4. That single number, the difference between 4 and 5, is the entire story in its most compressed form, and Andrews carries it with him as he walks, turning it over not because he doubts it, but because a trained mind does not stop working simply because the work is finished. He checks his figures the way a surgeon checks a diagnosis that is already certain. The checking is not hope, it is discipline. The ship was not designed to be unsinkable in any absolute sense. That word, unsinkable, has attached itself to the Titanic in the public imagination, repeated in newspaper advertisements and promotional literature until it acquired the weight of engineering fact. But the men who built her knew better. What they knew was that she could survive any combination of 4 flooded compartments and remain afloat, a genuine achievement, a real advance over the vessels that preceded her, a legitimate source of professional pride. They had done the mathematics correctly. The mathematics had simply met a situation they had not been asked to solve. Andrews descends another level. The water is higher here. He can hear it now. A low, continuous sound, not dramatic, not violent, more like the sound of a slow drain running in reverse. He moves the lantern and watches the waterline mark on the bulkhead, and understands that the rate of inflow is consistent with what his calculations predict. He is not surprised. He has not been surprised since the first compartment. What he is, in this moment, is something more difficult to name. A man in the presence of a conclusion he has reached and cannot unreach, walking through the evidence of his own exactness. He is a professional. He behaves like one. He does not linger. He does not stand in the flooding dark and grieve for the ship he built. He turns and makes his way back toward the upper decks, back toward the bridge, back toward the captain, because the information he carries is not his to keep. It belongs to the chain of command. It belongs to the 2,000 people sleeping above him who do not yet know what the next 2 hours will require of them. Captain Edward John Smith is 62 years old and has spent 40 years at sea. He has commanded more ships than most men will ever board. His career is a long record of crossings completed, passengers delivered, confidence justified. He is the most experienced ocean liner commander in the White Star Fleet, which is precisely why he has been given the Titanic for her maiden voyage, a ceremonial assignment, an honor, the natural capstone of a career built on steadiness. He was planning to retire after this crossing. That detail is not a dramatic irony. It is simply a fact, and it lands the way facts land when they are true. Andrews finds him on the bridge and delivers the calculation plainly. The ship will sink. There is no scenario in which it does not. The mathematics are not ambiguous. Given the rate of flooding, given the compartments already compromised, given the height of the bulkheads that were designed for a different kind of damage, the bow will continue to settle until the sea comes over the forward bulkheads and fills the remaining compartments in sequence. The process is already underway. It cannot be stopped. Andrews estimates perhaps 2 hours, perhaps a little more. Smith receives this. The narration should not enter his mind here, because the narration does not know what is in it, and to speculate would be to reduce a man to a symbol. What can be said is this: he is a man whose entire professional life has been a preparation for exactly this kind of moment. The moment when the captain must be steadiest, must be clearest, must be the fixed point around which everything else organizes. And he stands at the center of that moment now, having just been told that the fixed point is going under. He gives the order to uncover the lifeboats. He gives the order to muster the passengers. He does what the situation requires because he is a professional, and professionals do what the situation requires even when, especially when, the situation is this. Above them, the ship continues to be what it was an hour ago. In the first-class smoking room, a card game has just ended. In the second-class dining saloon, the stewards have long since cleared the tables and the room sits empty and clean, waiting for a breakfast it will not serve. In the third-class berths, in the forward sections of the ship, the passengers who have felt the collision most directly. The shudder was stronger there, the sound was stranger, have mostly settled back into their bunks, deciding that whatever happened has been handled, that the officers know, the T. The ship is fine. The ship is new. The ship is the largest moving object in the history of human construction. The ship is fine. This is not stupidity. This is not naivety. It is the entirely rational application of prior experience to a present situation, and prior experience says that ships do not sink. Prior experience says that the people in charge of ships know what they are doing. Prior experience has been right, consistently, for long enough that it has earned the authority it carries. The people sleeping in those berths have no reason to doubt it, and so they do not. That gap between what Andrews knows and what the rest of the ship does not yet know is the true subject of this chapter. It is not a gap created by failure. It is not the product of negligence or incompetence or hubris, though all of those words will be applied to this night in the years that follow. It is the gap that exists inside every complex system, between the moment of damage and the moment of recognition, between the truth and the general awareness of the truth. In most cases, that gap closes without consequence. The damage is contained. The system recovers. The gap never becomes visible because nothing falls through it. Tonight, everything falls through it. Andrews makes his way back through the ship. He has told the captain what he knows. He has done what a professional does. There is nothing left for him to calculate, and so he does something that is harder than calculation. He keeps moving. He speaks to passengers he encounters in the corridors, calmly, without alarm, encouraging them toward the boat deck. He helps a woman with her lifebelt, adjusting the straps with the careful attention of a man who has no other way to be useful. He is not a hero in this moment, in the way that word is usually deployed. He is something quieter and more difficult. A man who knows exactly what is happening and has no power to change it, doing the small things that remain within his power to do. The lantern he carries throws a small circle of light against the flooding dark, and in that circle is the entire story. A man who built something magnificent, standing inside his own creation as it begins to die, holding numbers that are exact and true and too late. The water continues to rise in the compartments below, indifferent to the precision of the man who calculated its progress. The ship settles, almost imperceptibly, at the bow. Above, passengers are beginning to stir, beginning to dress, beginning to climb toward the boat deck with the mild, manageable concern of people who have been told to take precautions, not to panic. The gap between what is known and what is understood is still enormous. It will close. It will close in ways that no one on the boat deck has yet imagined. But the question that will outlast the ship is already forming, unspoken, in the cold air of the lower decks. Not how did this happen? How did no one see it coming? That question does not belong to this night alone. It belongs to every system ever built by human hands and human confidence, and the long, genuine record of human success. It is the question that confident systems cannot ask of themselves, because confidence, when it has never been seriously tested, cannot know its own edges. It fills the available space completely. It leaves no room. Andrews carries his lantern forward, the water rises behind him, and the night is just beginning. To understand the Titanic, you must first understand the civilization that produced her. And that civilization, in the first decade of the 20th century, has every reason to believe in itself. The railways have conquered distance. The telegraph has conquered time. The great industrial cities of Britain and Europe and America are producing wealth at a rate that would have been incomprehensible to any previous generation. And the men who run the institutions of this world are not gamblers or dreamers. They are professionals, trained and credentialed, operating within systems that have been refined by accumulated success. This is not a world that stumbles into the future. It walks there deliberately, with instruments in hand. Consider what the preceding 50 years have delivered. In 1860, a letter from London to New York takes 10 days if the weather cooperates. By 1912, a wireless message crosses the same distance in seconds. In 1860, the crossing itself, by sail, by luck, by the indifferent mercy of the North Atlantic, claims ships with a regularity that sailors accept as the natural condition of their work. By 1912, the steamship lines published departure times and arrival windows with the confidence of railway timetables, and they are met. Not always, but nearly always. And nearly always, repeated across years and voyages and thousands of crossings, becomes something that feels, from the inside, indistinguishable from certainty. The North Atlantic is, by any honest accounting, the most consequential corridor on Earth. It is not merely a body of water. It is a mechanism. Along its length, in both directions and in all seasons, move the raw materials of civilization, cotton and steel, coal and grain, the correspondence of governments and the capital of empires, and the people. Above all, the people. In the decade before 1912, more than 1 million souls a year cross from the old world to the new, carrying everything they own and everything they hope for in bags and trunks, and the particular compressed determination of those who have decided that what lies behind them is finished. They travel in the lower decks of the great liners, in third class, in steerage, in conditions that are Spartan, but no longer, by the standards of the age, cruel. The ships that carry them are not indifferent to their existence. They are, in fact, one of the great logistical achievements of the era. The movement of human beings across an ocean at scale, on schedule, with a survival rate that would have seemed miraculous to any mariner of the previous century. The companies that operate these ships understand exactly what they are. They are arguments. Each new vessel is a position taken in a running debate about what engineering can achieve, what capital can command, and what the future looks like when it arrives on time. Cunard argues for speed. Hamburg Amerika argues for scale. And White Star Line, in the first decade of the new century, makes a considered and deliberate choice to argue for something different, for size, yes, and for luxury, for the proposition that the crossing itself can be transformed from an ordeal into an experience, from endurance into pleasure, and that the class of passenger who will pay most handsomely for that transformation is a class that exists, is growing, and is waiting to be served. This is not vanity, it is strategy. And the man who embodies it most completely is J. Bruce Ismay. Ismay is the chairman of White Star, the son of its founder, a man who has spent his entire professional life in the machinery of ocean travel. He is precise and unsentimental. He understands his market with the kind of granular clarity that comes from years of close attention, and what he understands is this: the very wealthy do not need to cross the Atlantic quickly. They need to cross it comfortably. They need to cross it in rooms that do not remind them they are at sea. They need dining rooms that recall the finest hotels in London and New York, smoking rooms paneled in mahogany, promenades long enough for a morning constitutional, and the general sensation that the ocean is something happening outside, at a respectful distance, while they continue their lives undisturbed within. Ismay is not wrong about any of this. He is, in fact, entirely right. The decision to build the Olympic and the Titanic, sister ships of unprecedented scale, designed together, built in sequence at Harland and Wolff in Belfast, is the expression of this philosophy made physical. It is a bit, but not a reckless one. It is a bit made with full information, by professionals who have studied the numbers and consulted the engineers and satisfied themselves that what they are proposing is not merely possible but achievable on schedule and within budget. The pressure that accompanies this project is real, but it is not the pressure of a speed record, not the frantic urgency of chasing a blue riband. It is something quieter and in some ways more pervasive. It is the pressure of expectation, of a schedule, of a maiden voyage already announced, already booked, already anticipated by the press and the public and the shareholders. And it is the pressure, subtle but constant, of a chairman who will be aboard, who is, in fact, himself the commercial proposition the ship represents, traveling in her finest suite, present at her tables, visible proof that the man who built the argument believes in it completely. This is the context in which Thomas Andrews works. Andrews is the managing director of the design department at Harland & Wolff, and he is, by the assessment of everyone who works with him and everyone who works for him, the finest shipbuilder of his generation. He is 39 years old in 1912. He has been at the yard since he was 16, when he arrived as an apprentice and began the long, methodical education that the trade requires. Not merely the drawing of plans, but the physical knowledge of construction, of material, of the 10,000 small decisions that accumulate between ABL, U-print, and a ship. He knows the Titanic the way a composer knows a score. He has written himself, not as an abstraction, but as a living system of relationships, each element dependent on the others, each choice the consequence of choices made before it. His confidence is not arrogance. It cannot be called arrogance. It is the product of mastery, of years of earned knowledge, of a record of ships built and launched and sailed without incident across the most demanding waters in the world. He has not cut corners. He does not cut corners. The steel is the best available. The watertight compartments, 16 of them, separated by bulkheads that can be closed remotely from the bridge, represent a genuine advance in naval architecture, a system designed with explicit attention to survivability in the event of collision or flooding. When the press calls the Titanic unsinkable, Andrews does not say this, but he understands why they do, and he does not find the description wholly unreasonable. The mathematics, under most foreseeable circumstances, support it. He is a man who has earned the right to his certainty. That is the important thing to hold on to. He has earned it. The ship that rises in the slipway at Belfast across the years of her construction is not a monument to excess. She is a monument to competence. The scale of her is almost impossible to render in words. 882 feet from bow to stern, longer than the height of any building then standing on Earth. 46,000 tons. 29 boilers feeding 2 reciprocating engines and a central turbine, generating enough power to drive her at 21 knots through seas that would have stopped the ships of a generation before. The hull plating alone requires 3 million rivets, driven by teams of men working in the din and heat of the gantries. Each rivet a small act of precision repeated until the whole becomes something that floats. She is fitted with a gymnasium on the boat deck, with mechanical horses and rowing machines and a stationary bicycle, because the passengers who travel in her first-class accommodations have come to expect the maintenance of their physical routines even in transit. There is a swimming bath, tiled and heated. A Turkish bath with a cooling room finished in Arabian style, its tiles blue and green and intricate. A squash court, a dark room for amateur photographers, a lending library, barbershops, a hospital with its own operating theater. The first-class dining saloon seats 550 at a single sitting and is paneled in white and gold in the style of early Jacobean England. The à la carte restaurant on B-deck offers a menu that compares favorably with the Ritz. The first-class cabins, parlor suites with private promenades, bedrooms furnished in period styles ranging from Louis XVI to Old Dutch, are designed not to feel like cabins at all, but like rooms in a country house that happens, incidentally, to be moving across an ocean. And then there is the rest of the ship. Because the Titanic is not only a floating hotel for the wealthy, she is also a vessel of passage for the thousands who travel in second and third class. Accommodations that are, by the standards of the time, genuinely decent and that represent their own kind of argument that the crossing need not be a misery for those who cannot afford a parlor suite. That Eve N., the immigrant traveling with everything he owns in a single bag, is owed a bunk and a meal and a safe arrival. The ship carries, in her lower decks, a world, Polish and Swedish and Lebanese and Irish and English, families and solitary young men, the whole mobile human complexity of an era in which the map of where people live is being redrawn by aspiration and necessity, and the simple fact that the crossing is now survivable, affordable, and no longer a matter of prayer. Andrews knows all of this. He has walked every deck. He has inspected every compartment. He has sat with the plans and the specifications and the reports from the sea trials and satisfied himself, as he always does, that the ship is what she is supposed to be. She is ready. He is ready. And the confidence that fills him as she prepares to leave Southampton is not the confidence of a man who has ignored the risks. It is the confidence of a man who has considered them, weighed them against everything he knows, and found them manageable. That is the word, manageable. The ship that emerges from Belfast is 882 feet long, 46,000 tons, and fitted with a gymnasium, a swimming bath, a Turkish bath, a squash court, and dining rooms of a quality that rival the finest hotels in London or New York. She is the largest moving object human beings have ever built. The confidence that fills her is not vanity. It is the natural and reasonable product of a civilization that has learned correctly that its methods work, and that has not yet been given a reason to ask what happens when they do not. Below the grand staircase, below the first-class dining saloon, below the second-class library and the third-class general room, there is another ship entirely. A ship of heat and noise and physical labor that most of the passengers above will never see and many will never think about. The stokers and trimmers and firemen who power the Titanic across the Atlantic are the engine of everything, and their world is as far from the promenade deck as the promenade deck is from the moon. To understand the Titanic is to descend. It is to follow the spiral staircase of attention downward, past the carved oak banisters and the potted palms, past the carpeted corridors and the linen-pressed cabins, down through the waterline and into the belly of the ship where the air tastes of iron and sulfur and the heat is a physical prise, ends that pushes against a man's chest like a hand. This is where the work is. This is where it has always been. And the men who do it are, in their own way, as skilled and as necessary as any engineer who ever bent over a drawing board in Belfast. They are called firemen, though they fight no fires. They are called trimmers, though they shape nothing with their hands except the distribution of coal in a bunker. They are called greasers, and the name is honest. They move through the engine spaces with oil cans and rags, attending to the machinery the way a doctor attends to a patient, listening for sounds that do not belong, feeling for heat where there should be none. There are nearly 300 of them in the engine and boiler departments alone, and they work in shifts of 4 hours on and 8 hours off, a rhythm that has nothing to do with the rhythm of the sea and everything to do with the rhythm of fire. The boiler rooms, there are 6 of them, stretching nearly a third of the ship's length. Each contain 5 or 6 massive furnaces, and each furnace must be fed continuously. A trimmer wheels coal from the bunkers in barrows, and a fireman shovels it through the furnace doors in a motion that is less a gesture than a discipline, controlled, timed, angled precisely to distribute the burning mass evenly across the grate. A good fireman knows by the color of the flame whether the mixture is right. He knows by the sound of the draft whether the dampers need adjustment. He cannot read the gauges from where he stands, but he does not need to. His body is the instrument. He has learned to read the furnace the way a sailor reads the sky. Their quarters are in the bow, as far forward and as far below as it is possible to be on a ship this size. A deliberate geography, a physical expression of the social order that governs everything aboard. They sleep in bunk rooms that are functional and nothing more. They eat in a mess separate from the stewards and the deck crew. They move through the ship along routes that are designed to keep them invisible, tunnels and alleyways that run below the passenger decks, so that the work of powering the ship does not intrude upon the experience of riding it. They are the engine of everything, and the engine is hidden. What their names are, the historical record is sometimes uncertain about. The manifests list them by rank and rating. The inquiries that will follow this voyage will call them by occupation more often than by name. But they are men with histories. Men from Southampton and Liverpool and Belfast. Men who have made this crossing before and will, most of them expect, make it again. Some are experienced hands who have spent their working lives in the engine rooms of great ships. Some are younger, signed on for the wages, which are better than the docks and steadier than the seasonal work ashore. They are not anonymous to each other. They know each other's habits and tolerances and tempers with the intimacy of men who share confined spaces under conditions of shared physical stress. They are a community, and their community is as real as any community on the decks above them. The engineers who oversee them occupy a different stratum, still invisible to the first-class passenger, but possessed of credentials and authority that the firemen are not. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell is 50 years old, a veteran of the sea whose career spans the era of transition from sail to steam, and he understands the machinery under his care with the thoroughness of a man who has spent decades listening to it. His officers, there are 25 of them, manage the engine rooms in the same 4-hour rotation as the men below them, and they carry the weight of knowing that if the machinery fails, everything fails. The lights go out, the pumps stop, the wireless goes silent. Everything that is happening above them depends on everything they do below. Higher still, and moving forward through the ship, there is a room that is small by any measure, perhaps 12 feet by 6, but whose importance in the spring of 1912 is difficult to overstate. The wireless room sits just aft of the bridge, and it contains equipment that represents, without exaggeration, a frontier of human communication. The Marconi apparatus installed aboard the Titanic is among the most powerful at sea. Its range, under good conditions, extends to several hundred miles. The two men who operate it, Jack Phillips, 25 years old, and Harold Bride, 22, are not employees of the White Star Line. They are Marconi Company operators, hired out to the ship, responsible to their own employer's protocols rather than to the ship's chain of command. Phillips is the senior operator, a young man of considerable technical skill who has spent his working life mastering a technology that most of the world still regards with something close to wonder. He and Bride work in alternating shifts, and on the evening of April 14, 1912, they are behind. The Titanic's wireless equipment has been out of service for a portion of the voyage, a technical fault repaired, but the interruption has produced a backlog of passenger traffic, personal messages, commercial telegrams that the two operators are working steadily to clear. The work is real and pressing. The Cape Race wireless station is within range, and the queue of messages waiting to be transmitted is long. Throughout the day, other messages have arrived. They come from other ships, the Caronia, the Baltic, the Amerika, the Californian, and they carry information about ice. Not rumored ice, not ice in the abstract. Ice in specific coordinates, at specific latitudes and longitudes, in the precise stretch of ocean the Titanic is crossing. The messages are received and logged. Several are physically delivered to the bridge. One is carried by Captain Smith himself to the first-class smoking room, where it is shown to J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of the White Star Line, who is traveling aboard as a passenger. Ismay puts the message in his pocket. He will produce it later, at dinner, to show other passengers. He is not concealing it. He is, in his own understanding, sharing it. The ice is a fact, and the fact is noted, and the noting of it is understood to be sufficient. This is not negligence. It is important to say that plainly. The ice warnings of April 14th are handled by men who are following the procedures their experience has taught them to follow, in a professional culture that has encountered ice warnings before and has navigated through them without incident. There is no protocol aboard the Titanic, or aboard any ship of her era, that requires a wireless operator to treat a navigational hazard report differently from a passenger telegram. There is no procedure that mandates a response, a course change, a reduction in speed. The warnings go to the bridge, and the bridge receives them, and the ship continues. This is what ships do. This is what ships have always done. Captain Edward John Smith is 62 years old. He has been at sea for more than 4 decades. He has commanded the largest ships in the world, the Majestic, the Baltic, the Adriatic, the Olympic, and he has done so without a serious accident. The press has already written the story of his retirement, and it is a graceful story. One final crossing on the grandest ship ever built, and then the quiet dignity of a career concluded. He is a large man, white-bearded, possessed of the particular authority that comes not from assertion, but from accumulated trust. His officers respect him. His passengers seek him out at dinner with the eagerness of people who want to be near greatness. He is, by any reasonable measure, exactly the man you would want in command of this ship. And that is precisely what makes him so interesting to consider. He is not a reckless man. He is not an arrogant man. He is a professional operating within a professional culture, and the professional culture says that ice warnings are noted and that ships proceed. He has done this before. Nothing has happened. The confidence he carries is not a character flaw. It is the accumulated weight of 40 years of ships that have held. His officers are younger, and they are different from each other in ways that will matter. William Murdoch, the first officer, is 40 years old, capable, experienced, a man of practical temperament who makes decisions and lives with them. Charles Lightoller, the second officer, is 38, and he is possessed of a rigidity that his admirers call principle and his critics might call inflexibility. He is a man who knows what the rules say and follows them with a completeness that admits no improvisation. They are not yet tested. They are not yet known to themselves in the way that crisis reveals a person. They are, on the evening of April 14th, simply officers doing their work, navigating, supervising, preparing for the watch changes that govern the ship's rhythms as reliably as the tides. Below all of this, in the forward sections of E and F decks, the third-class accommodations hold a different kind of human story. The passengers here are not traveling with luggage in the conventional sense. They are traveling with the materials of entirely new lives, the tools of trades they intend to practice in new countries, the documents that establish who they are, the addresses of relatives who have gone ahead and written back that there is work, that there is possibility, that the crossing is worth whatever it costs. They come from Ireland and Sweden and Croatia and Lebanon and a dozen other places, and they speak among themselves in a dozen languages, and the ship they are aboard is larger and more comfortable than anything they have ever traveled on. The third-class general room is plain but adequate. The berths are small but private, an improvement for many of these passengers over the open dormitories of earlier emigrant ships. They are not mistreated. They are simply accommodated according to their fare, which is to say, they are accommodated according to their place in a hierarchy so natural, so thoroughly assumed by everyone aboard, that it requires no enforcement. It simply is. The geography of the ship expresses it without apology. The promenade decks belong to first class, the enclosed spaces to second, and the forward and aft sections of the lower decks to third. Each group moves within its own portion of the ship, as though the boundaries are walls, though most of them are not. They are simply understood. What none of these passengers know, what none of the officers know, what the firemen and the wireless operators and the engineers do not know, is that the geography they inhabit so naturally, so unquestioningly, is about to become consequential in a way that no one has thought to plan for. The distance between a third-class berth and a lifeboat is not merely physical. It is navigational, linguistic, hierarchical. It is measured in familiarity with the ship's layout, in knowledge of where the exits are, in the ability to understand an instruction given in a language you have never learned. These distances exist on every ship of this era. They have never mattered before because the ship has always arrived. The Titanic is not one ship. She is a society in miniature, stratified with the same precision as the civilization that built her, and every stratum has its own relationship to danger, to information, and to escape. What no one aboard knows yet is that the stratification they inhabit so naturally, so unquestioningly, will determine not just how they live on this crossing, but whether they live at all. The morning of April 14th arrives quietly. The sea is moderate. The sky is clear. The Titanic is 3 days out of Southampton and running well, her engines turning at a pace that satisfies everyone who has a reason to care about such things. In the first-class dining saloon, breakfast is served with the same precision it has been served every morning of the crossing. In third class, the long tables fill with families who have carried everything they own onto this ship and are now, for the first time in days, beginning to believe that the crossing might actually be ordinary. The crew moves through its routines. The officers stand their watches. The wireless room hums with traffic, social telegrams, business communications, the ordinary commerce of a world that has come to depend on instantaneous communication the way it once depended on wind. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the first message arrives. It comes from the Coronia, a Cunard liner traveling the opposite direction, and it is brief and specific: ice, growlers, and field ice at a particular latitude and longitude. The position is in the Titanic's path. The message is received by the wireless operators, noted, and passed along to the bridge. Captain Edward Smith reads it. He acknowledges it. He has the position marked. The system works exactly as it was designed to work, and this is important to understand, because what follows is not a story of failure in the ordinary sense. The warning does not disappear. It does not go unread. It moves through the correct channels, touches the correct hands, and arrives at the correct desk. The system holds. And because the system holds, no one has any reason to question whether the system is enough. Smith is 62 years old. He has spent more than 4 decades at sea. He has crossed the North Atlantic more times than he can easily count, and in those crossings he has received ice warnings before, many times, in many conditions, and the procedure has always been the same. Note the position, inform the bridge, maintain alertness, proceed. Nothing in his experience has ever suggested that this procedure is insufficient. His career is, in fact, a sustained argument for its sufficiency. He has arrived at the command of the largest ship in the world, not despite his adherence to established practice, but because of it. He is not a man who takes shortcuts. He is a man who has mastered the path that experience has worn smooth, and that path has always led him safely to port. This is the trap, and it is invisible from the inside. The Baltic's warning arrives at noon. Another position, another notation, another mark on the chart that slowly, incrementally fills in the picture of what lies ahead. The ice is not a rumor. It is not a vague atmospheric possibility. It is a documented fact, reported by professionals, transmitted through the most modern communication system the world has yet produced, and received by men who know exactly what to do with it. What they know to do is note it and proceed. And so, they note it and proceed. What happens next is worth considering slowly, because it is the moment where the story's human texture becomes most legible. The Amerika, a German liner operating on a nearby route, transmits a warning to the United States Hydrographic Office, reporting 2 large icebergs directly in the Titanic's intended path. The message passes through the Titanic's wireless room. But the Amerika is not addressing the Titanic. The message is not flagged as urgent. It carries no special priority. In the wireless room, where Jack Phillips and Harold Bride are managing a backlog of passenger messages, social telegrams, business cables, the accumulated personal commerce of more than 2,000 people who are paying for the privilege of instantaneous connection. The Amerika's warning moves TE through the system the way everything moves through the system. It is received. It is relayed. And somewhere in the relay, it reaches J. Bruce Ismay. Ismay is the managing director of the White Star Line. He is aboard not as an operational authority, but as a passenger of consequence, a man whose presence signals the importance of the voyage. He takes the message, he reads it, He puts it in his pocket. This is the moment that will be examined and re-examined in the inquiries that follow, and it is important to resist the reading that makes it simple. Ismay is not suppressing information. He is not a man in that moment calculating risk and deciding to conceal it. He is a man for whom this information carries no operational urgency because nothing in his life has taught him that it should. He shows it at lunch as a point of interest. Here is where the ice is. Here is how far we are from it. Here is the kind of thing that is managed by professionals every day on this ocean. The ice is a fact. It is not, in his understanding, a crisis. He returns the message to Captain Smith in the late afternoon, and Smith receives it the way he has received every other warning that day, with professional attention, with procedural competence, and with no particular alteration of his intentions. The ship does not slow. This is the decision that will be debated for more than a century, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms before it is judged. The decision not to reduce speed is not reckless, it is precedented. Ships have received ice warnings before. Ships have steamed through ice regions at full speed before. The practice is common enough that it has its own professional logic. Visibility is good, the watch is alert, the lookouts are posted, and slowing a ship of this size and momentum is not a simple adjustment. It costs time, it costs coal. It disrupts the schedule that passengers expect and that the company requires. And more than any of these practical considerations, it has never been necessary before. The sample size of prior crossings is enormous, and the sample says, proceed. Smith is not gambling. He is extrapolating from a record that has never given him a reason to do otherwise. That is not negligence. That is the way that experienced professionals in every field make decisions in conditions of incomplete information. It is, in fact, the only way anyone makes decisions in conditions of incomplete information. The tragedy is not that Smith gets it wrong. The tragedy is that the method that has always gotten it right contains no mechanism for recognizing the moment when it will not. Evening comes slowly. The light leaves the sky in degrees, and as it goes, the sea changes character. This is the detail that experienced sailors would later name as the most consequential meteorological fact of the night. The sea goes glassy. The wind drops. The surface of the North Atlantic, which on any ordinary night would be textured enough to show the white water breaking at the base of an iceberg, goes still and dark and smooth. In ordinary conditions, ice announces itself. It creates disturbance. The sea breaks against it, and the foam is visible from a distance, a white signature in the darkness. But on a calm night, with no swell and no wind, the ice sits in the water without announcement. It does not disturb the surface. It does not catch the light because there is no moon. It simply stands in the darkness and waits for geometry to do its work. Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee climb to the crow's nest as the evening watch begins. They are lookouts. Their job, stripped to its essence, is to watch. They know this sea. They know what they are looking for. They stand at the front of the nest and look out over the black water, and they see what the night is willing to show them, which is very little. The temperature is dropping. It has been dropping all afternoon, and experienced sailors know this too. A sudden drop in air temperature is one of the oldest indicators of ice in the vicinity. The officers on the bridge note the temperature. They note it the way they note everything, professionally, procedurally, without alarm, because alarm requires a reason, and the reason has not yet presented itself. The binoculars are missing. This is a small thing. It is the kind of small thing that happens on any ship, on any crossing, without consequence. Somewhere in the transition between Southampton and the open sea, the binoculars that belong in the crow's nest have ended up in a locked case, and the key to the case cannot be located, and the matter has been noted and set aside as the kind of administrative inconvenience that gets resolved at the next port. Fleet and Lee know about the binoculars. They have mentioned them. The matter has not been treated as urgent because binoculars in a crow's nest are supplementary equipment. The primary instrument is the human eye, trained and practiced, and the human eye has always been sufficient. The logic is sound. The logic has always been sound. And so Fleet and Lee stand in the darkness with their eyes and their experience and the ordinary confidence of men who have done this work before and have always seen what there was to see. What they cannot know, what no one on the ship can know, is that tonight the conditions have aligned in a way that makes the eye alone insufficient. The calm sea gives no warning at the base. The moonless sky gives no light to catch a silhouette. The cold air creates a slight atmospheric distortion that compresses the horizon. And the binoculars, which might have added precious seconds to the detection distance, sit locked in a case somewhere below. None of these factors is catastrophic in isolation. Each one is manageable. Together, they form something that has no name yet, because it has not yet produced a consequence that requires naming. The Titanic moves through the darkness at 22.5 knots. This is nearly her full speed. At this pace, she is covering the water at a rate of roughly 38 feet per second, and the darkness ahead of her is giving nothing back. The warnings are in the log. The Caronias at 9 in the morning, the Baltics at noon, the Americas in the afternoon. Each one received, each one processed, each one absorbed into the ordinary administrative life of a ship that is doing exactly what it was built to do. The ice is in the water, sitting in the calm darkness, without announcement, without apology, without any obligation to make itself known before it is found. The distance between these two facts is closing at 38 feet per second. No one on the bridge has a reason to believe tonight is different from any other night. Captain Smith has the same reason to trust this crossing that he has always had. The weight of every crossing before it that ended safely, that arrived on schedule, that confirmed the method and ratified the competence. The officers have the same reason. The lookouts have the same reason. The system has the same reason. The trap requires no villain. It requires no failure of character, no lapse of attention, no moment of human weakness that a stronger or wiser person might have avoided. It requires only that everything continue to work exactly as it always has, that the warnings be received and logged, that the watches be kept, that the lookouts watch, that the officers trust their instruments and their experience, that the ship move at the speed that ships move, and that the one thing no one has been given a reason to imagine be true tonight for the first time. The ice does not know it is being approached. The ship does not know it is approaching. The darkness holds both facts with perfect equanimity, keeping its own counsel, giving nothing away. And somewhere in the crow's nest, Fleet and Lee stand in the cold and watch the black water and wait for the night to show them something. They are looking. They have always been looking. They will go on looking until there is something to see, and when there is something to see, it will be very close, and the 38 feet per second will have already made certain decisions that no one on this ship has yet been asked to make. That is the precise nature of the trap. Not darkness, not ice, not speed or overconfidence or the ambition of great ships and greater schedules. The trap is this, that a system which has always worked cannot, from the inside, perceive the outer limit of its own reliability. It can only discover that limit by reaching it. And tonight, closing through a moonless calm at 38 feet per second, the Titanic is about to learn something that no ship has ever been required to teach before. That confidence, accumulated through genuine success, fills the available space completely. It leaves no room for the question that might have changed everything. It leaves no room at all. Frederick Fleet is cold. He has been cold for the better part of 2 hours, standing in the crow's nest 80 feet above the waterline, his eyes moving across the darkness ahead in the slow, practiced sweep of a man who has learned to look without staring. Beside him, Reginald Lee shifts his weight. Neither speaks much. There is nothing to say. The ship moves beneath them like a city that does not know it is moving. its lights warm and steady in the decks below, its wake a long white seam opening behind them in the glassy black water. The air is cold enough to hurt. The stars are extraordinary. There is no moon. At 11:39 in the evening, Fleet sees something. It does not announce itself. It does not rise dramatically from the water or catch the light in some warning way. It is simply there. A shape, darker than the dark around it. A mass of absence where the stars should be, sitting low and heavy at the horizon and growing, very slowly and then very quickly, larger. Fleet's mind does not debate what he is seeing. His body knows before his mind finishes the thought. He reaches for the crow's nest bell and strikes it 3 times. The sound carries across the still air with perfect clarity. He reaches for the telephone. The officer who answers is 6th Officer Moody. His voice is calm. He asks what Fleet sees. Fleet says, "Iceberg, right ahead." Moody says, "Thank you." This exchange, in its exact procedural brevity, is the sound of a world that does not yet know what it is. 2 men doing their jobs, speaking the language of their training, operating within a system that has always worked before. The thank you is not irony. It is not complacency. It is the natural register of men who have been taught that the system handles things, that the information flows where it needs to flow, that the next step will follow the previous one in the orderly fashion that experience has established. The world does not announce itself when it changes. It simply changes, while the people inside it continue to speak in the measured tones of the world that preceded it. On the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch is already moving. He does not wait for Moody to finish relaying the report. He has heard the bell. He has looked through the wheelhouse windows into the darkness ahead, and he has seen, or is beginning to see, the shape that Fleet has seen. A dark mass resolving itself out of the darkness at a distance that his mind is already calculating, already measuring against the known variables of speed and d turning radius, and the terrible, unalterable physics of a ship this size in motion. He issues his orders without hesitation. Hard, a starboard, engines full astern. He telegraphs the engine room. He reaches for the switch that closes the watertight doors. These are the correct orders. There is no debate about this, not then and not in the century of analysis that will follow. Murdoch sees the problem, identifies the response, and executes it with the decisiveness of a man who is trained for exactly this kind of moment. The problem is the geometry. The Titanic is 882 feet long. She weighs, fully loaded, more than 52,000 tons. She is moving at 22.5 knots, 38 feet per second, more or less, through water that offers no friction worth mentioning on a night this calm. Between the bow and the iceberg, when Fleet makes his call, there are perhaps 450 yards of open ocean. The ship needs more than twice that distance to stop, even under full reverse thrust. And stopping is not what Murdoch is attempting. He is attempting to turn, to swing the bow to port, to thread the ship past the iceberg on the starboard side, to use the maneuverability that her designers have built into her, and that her rudder, responding now to the helmsman's wheel, is beginning to employ. The bow begins to swing. It is not enough. In the 37 seconds between Fleet's telephone call and the moment of contact, the bow moves perhaps 2 degrees to port. In a different ship, smaller and quicker to answer her helm, 2 degrees might be the margin. In a different moment, with the iceberg spotted 30 seconds earlier, with binoculars, perhaps, the kind that were locked in a cabinet in the crow's nest because the officer who had the key left the ship at Southampton and no one thought to find another key, in that slightly different moment, the HD margin might have been enough. The iceberg would have slid past in the darkness, close enough to see, close enough to feel, and Fleet and Lee would have spoken about it afterward in the mess, and it would have been a near miss, a story, the kind of thing that makes a man's hands shake for an hour and then becomes part of the text. Year of a career. Perhaps. The smallness of the margin is not a moral. It is a measurement. 30 seconds. Perhaps enough. Perhaps not. The ocean does not negotiate. The starboard bow meets the iceberg at approximately 11:40 in the evening. Those who are awake and near the point of impact describe the sensation in ways that resist the dramatic. A prolonged tearing, a shudder, something like a key dragged along a wall, or like the ship rolling over a series of large stones, or like a grinding that seems to come from somewhere far below and then stops. It lasts perhaps 10 seconds. Then there is quiet. The engines, already reversing, slow and then still. The ship glides forward on her own momentum for a short distance and then comes to rest. The iceberg, tall as a building and ancient beyond any human reckoning, moves silently past the starboard side and continues into the darkness behind them. Most of the passengers sleep through this entirely. In the first-class staterooms on the upper decks, men and women turn in their beds, register something. A vibration, perhaps, a brief disturbance in the otherwise perfect smoothness of the crossing, and return to sleep. In the third-class accommodations in the bow, closer to the point of impact, some passengers are woken more definitively. They sit up. They listen. They feel the strained absence of the engines, which have been running continuously since Southampton, and whose silence is itself a kind of noise. Some of them dress. Some of them look into the corridor. Most of them, finding no immediate explanation and no immediate instruction, wait. They have been trained by experience and by their position in the world to wait for someone to tell them what to do. The catastrophe arrives without announcing itself. This is not incidental. It is the chapter's deepest truth made physical, made real in the sleeping bodies of 1,500 people who are, at this moment, in the most danger they have ever been in, and who do not know it, and who have no reason yet to know it, because the ship around them is still lit, still warm, still structurally whole from the inside, still everything a ship is supposed to be. The damage is below the waterline. It is invisible. It is, in a sense, theoretical. It exists in the mathematics of flooding rates and compartment volumes and the tolerance of the watertight bulkheads, which were designed to handle a certain number of flooded compartments and are about to be asked to handle more. Thomas Andrews goes below with a lantern. He is 39 years old. He has been the managing director of the shipbuilding department at Harland & Wolff, and he knows this ship the way a composer knows a score. Not just the architecture of it, but the logic, the reasoning behind every decision, the places where the design accommodates, and the places where it does ot. He has been on these voyages before, shakedown crossings, watching for problems, making notes, carrying a small book in which he writes down the things that need correcting. He has notes about the coat hooks in the first-class staterooms, about the number of screws in the reading room paneling. He is that kind of man. He goes below now with the same methodical attention he brings to everything, moving through the flooding compartments, observing, measuring, calculating. What he finds is not a gash. The popular image, a long, clean tear running down the hull, is wrong. What the iceberg has done is more subtle and in some ways more terrible. Across nearly 300 feet of hull, in 5 separate compartments, the collision has buckled plates, strung rivets, open seams. The sea enters not in a torrent, but in a series of intrusions, quiet and relentless, filling the spaces below the waterline with the patient indifference of water finding its level. In the boiler rooms, the firemen are already ankle-deep, then knee-deep, moving toward the watertight doors as they close. In the mailroom, the postal workers are watching their sorted bags begin to float. The ship's carpenter is taking soundings and reporting numbers that do not yet mean anything to anyone who has not done what Andrews is now doing, which is holding those numbers against the design specifications and performing the arithmetic. Andrews performs the arithmetic. He is in complete, terrible clarity. This is what the accounts suggest. The people who speak with him in these first minutes. Captain Smith, the officers who gather on the bridge to receive his assessment. He is not panicked. He is not in despair. Or, if he is, the despair is something he carries quietly, the way a surgeon carries the knowledge that the operation has not gone as hoped. He tells them what the mathematics say. 5 compartments open to the sea. The ship is designed to float with any 2 compartments flooded, or even any 3, 4 in some configurations. But 5 compartments flooding simultaneously means the bow will sink until the water in the forward compartments rises over the bulkheads and spills into the next, and then the next, in a sequence that cannot be stopped and can only be prolonged. The ship will sink. He calculates it will take perhaps 2 hours. He is, in the end, nearly exactly right. He writes nothing down. There is nothing left to note. Murdoch stands on the bridge. He has done everything a man in his position could have done. He has seen the danger and responded to it with training and decisiveness, and without a single wasted second. He has issued the right orders. He has closed the watertight doors. He has done, in the 37 seconds available to him, what 37 seconds allowed. He stands now in the particular stillness of a man who has exhausted the available actions and arrived at the far edge of his own competence and found that the far edge was not far enough. There is no accusation in this. There is only the hard, quiet fact of it. The fact that the system he served, the training he received, the experience he accumulated across years of crossings on this ocean, brought him to this moment and gave him 37 seconds and no more. Behind the ship, already receding into the darkness, the iceberg drifts south on the Labrador Current, as it has been drifting for months since it calved from some glacier on the coast of Greenland and began its slow migration toward the shipping lanes. It is perhaps 100 feet above the waterline, perhaps 500 below. It carries, along one face, a long scar of red paint, the red of a ship's bottom, the red of the Titanic's keel and hull below the waterline, transferred in the 10 seconds of contact and now moving away into the darkness of the North Atlantic at whatever speed the current carries it. From the surface of the ocean, from any external vantage, this is the only visible evidence that anything has happened at all. A mark of red paint on a piece of ice in the darkness, on a calm and starlit night, in the middle of an ocean that stretches in every direction to horizons no one can see. The ship is still lit. The water is still flat. The stars are still extraordinary. There is no moon. Below decks, the sea continues to enter. It does not hurry. It does not need to. Andrews closes his notebook. If he has his notebook, and perhaps he does not. Perhaps tonight is the first night in his professional life when the notebook is beside the point, and he goes to find the captain. He has a number in his mind. He carries it carefully, the way you carry something that cannot be put down and cannot be shared widely. Not yet, not until the people who need to know it have been told. The number is 2 hours, perhaps 2 hours and 40 minutes. The number is also 1,500 people and 20 lifeboats and 58 miles to the nearest ship that is listening. He walks through the corridors of the ship he built, past the staterooms where people are sleeping, past the grand staircase with its wrought iron and its glass dome and its clock, past the evidence of everything that human ingenuity and capital and ambition have assembled in this place and set moving across the ocean. It is, even now, a magnificent thing. It is exactly what it was designed to be. It has done nothing wrong. It has simply met the one thing it was not designed to meet, and the meeting has lasted 10 seconds, and the consequences of those 10 seconds are now unfolding in the dark water below the keel with all the patience and indifference of the physical world. Andrews finds the captain. He tells him what he knows. The captain listens. And then the long work of the night begins. The order to prepare the lifeboats goes out at approximately 12,005 in the morning, and it moves through the ship the way all orders move through a society, unevenly, filtered through hierarchy and language and geography, arriving at different speeds in different places and meaning different things. To different people depending on where they stand in the world, the Titanic has brought with it across the ocean. On the boat deck, the officers understand immediately. They have been trained for this. They know the stations, the davits, the lines. Their hands move with the particular efficiency of men executing a procedure they have rehearsed but never needed. The cold is sharp, the air is near freezing, the sea is black and perfectly still, and the deck is quiet in a way that does not yet feel like emergency. It feels, to the people beginning to gather there in their coats and their lifebelts, more like inconvenience, more like a drill conducted at an unfortunate hour. The ship is still lit. The band is still playing. The tilt, if one stands in the right place and does not look for it, is barely perceptible. This is its own kind of danger. The evacuation requires urgency, and urgency requires that people understand what is happening, and what is happening is not yet legible to most of those aboard. The officers know. Andrews knows. Captain Smith, standing at the center of a catastrophe that has no precedent in his experience, knows. But knowledge at the center of a hierarchy does not radiate outward uniformly. It travels along the channels that hierarchy has built, and those channels are not all the same width, not all the same depth, and some of them do not connect to one another at all. Charles Lightoller is on the port side. He is the second officer, the senior surviving officer of the watch, and he is a man of absolute professional formation. He has spent his career at sea learning that rules exist because experience has made them necessary, and that the moment you begin to treat a rule as a suggestion, you have already begun to fail. Women and children first. It is not a guideline. It is not an approximation. It is the order. And he will execute it with the same precision he would bring to any other task the sea has required of him. Lifeboat 6 goes away into the darkness carrying 28 people. It is rated for 65. The empty seats are visible to everyone on the deck. Men who could fill them are standing at the rail, watching the boat descend. Some of them are the husbands of women already seated in it. The mathematics are not hidden. They are entirely present, available to any person standing there who can count. And yet the boat goes. Lifeboat 1 carries 12. It is rated for 40. These are not accidents of chaos. They are the products of a man following a procedure with complete fidelity. Lightoller is not confused. He is not frightened into error. He is doing exactly what he understands his duty to require, and his understanding is so complete, so fully integrated into his professional identity, that the visible arithmetic of empty seats changes nothing. The rule is not a calculation. It is a principle. And principles, in Lightoller's world, do not bend to arithmetic. On the starboard side, First Officer William Murdoch reaches different conclusions from the same order. When women are present, he loads them first. When they are not, when a boat is ready and the davits are rigged and no women can be found in the immediate vicinity of the deck, he allows men to board. His boats leave fuller, not full. The disorder of the night, the disbelief of the passengers, the insufficient time to organize and communicate across the length of a ship that is now beginning to tilt with increasing intention. None of this allows for full, but fuller. The difference between the two sides of the same deck on the same night, under the same order, will become one of the central puzzles of the inquiries that follow. Two men, both professional, both dutiful, both doing their jobs, producing outcomes that diverge in ways that will cost lives on one side and preserve them on the other. The writer of the regulations that governed them had not specified which interpretation was correct. Perhaps he had not imagined the question would need to be answered. Lightoller will survive. He will testify before the British inquiry with a precision and a selectivity that strikes some observers as something more than honest recollection. He will defend the officers. He will defend the company. He will defend the decisions made on the boat deck with the same unflinching certainty he brought to the davit lines. His testimony will appear to some, in its careful architecture, to be shaped as much by institutional loyalty as by memory. A man protecting not only his profession, but the idea of his profession. The idea that trained men following correct procedures cannot be held responsible for outcomes that, no. correct procedure was designed to address. He is not lying exactly. He is curating. He is doing, in the inquiry room, what he did on the boat deck, following the protocol that his formation has given him, leaving the empty seats unaddressed. Now descend. Leave the boat deck and its cold electric lights, and its men in uniform, and its women in fur coats, and its boats dropping into the darkness, and go below. Go down through the first-class corridors with their carpeting and their paneling, down past the second-class dining saloon, down through the working passages where the smell of coal smoke and machine oil replaces the salt air, and keep going, down to where the third-class passengers live and sleep. And now wake to a ship that is tilting beneath them in a way they cannot explain and have not been told about. Many of them speak no English. They have come from places where English is not spoken. From Poland, from Syria, from Scandinavia, from the villages of southern Italy and the towns of Eastern Europe. And the announcements that are being made in the corridors above them are in a language that is not theirs. The instructions that might save their lives are traveling through a medium they cannot receive. This is not cruelty. It is not policy. It is the ship's ordinary architecture encountering an extraordinary circumstance, and the architecture is not equipped for it. The third-class accommodations are at the stern and the bow, separated from the upper decks by passages and staircases that were designed for the ship's normal operation, not for emergency navigation in the dark by people who have been aboard for 4 days and have never had reason to learn the route. To the boat deck. There are gates. They exist for reasons that the Board of Trade and the immigration authorities considered sound, to prevent the mixing of classes, to maintain the quarantine procedures required by American immigration law, to ensure that third-class passengers do not wander into spaces designated for other purposes. Why? And on a normal voyage, they are unremarkable. On this voyage, in these hours, they are the difference between a corridor and a trap. Some are unlocked by stewards who understand what is happening. Some are not. Some passengers find their way through on their own, navigating by instinct and desperation through a labyrinth that was never meant to be solved under pressure. Others wait for instructions that come too late or do not come. No villain is required to explain this. The ship has not been designed to kill its third-class passengers. The men who drew the plans and set the regulations were not operating in malice. They were operating in the assumptions of their time, that the ship would make its crossing, that the gates would serve their administrative purpose, that the question of emergency egress would remain theoretical. The architecture of the ship below the waterline reflects the architecture of the society above it, a set of systems built for normal times, optimized for normal times, and now meeting a circumstance that normal times did not include. Go further down. Go to where the firemen and the trimmers work, in the boiler rooms that have powered this ship across the Atlantic at a speed that has impressed everyone who knew about it. The sea is already here. It has been here for some time. It enters not as a wave, but as a presence, a rising, a seeping, a slow assertion of the physical world against the engineering that has been holding it at bay. The men in these spaces know what the water means. They know it before most of the passengers above them have begun to understand that anything is wrong. They stay. They keep the fires burning as long as the fires can be kept. They work the pumps. They do the things that trained men do when trained men are needed, in spaces that are filling with the sea, buying minutes for an evacuation they cannot see and will largely not benefit from. The lights stay on. The Titanic's lights burn until very near the end, and they burn because men in the flooding lower decks are keeping them burning. Their names are not well remembered. They did not leave accounts. They did not testify before inquiries. They went down with the ship in numbers that the survival statistics record without commentary, and the thing they bought with their labor, the light, the time, the continued operation of the machinery, was used unevenly by the people the ship's hierarchy placed above them. At the wireless, Jack Phillips is transmitting. The Carpathia has answered. She is 58 miles to the southeast, and her captain, Arthur Rostron, is already driving her toward the position at speeds that will later seem almost reckless, threading through ice fields in the dark with a certainty and a commitment that stand as one of the night's few unambiguous acts of all. He is coming. He will arrive. But arrival takes time, and time is the one resource the Titanic does not have in adequate supply. The Californian is closer. Her position is disputed. Some accounts place her 10 miles distant, others somewhat more, but she is visible. Her lights are visible from the Titanic's deck. The rockets that are being fired from the Titanic, white rockets sent up at intervals into the black sky, are visible from the Californian's bridge. Her officers see them. They discuss them. They consider the possibility that they indicate distress, and they consider the possibility that they do not, and they make the decision, or fail to make the decision, that results in no action. Her wireless operator has gone to sleep. There is no requirement that he remain awake. There is no regulation that mandates a continuous watch. The law, once again, has not kept pace with the technology, and the technology is now operating in a gap that the law has not yet imagined it needs to fill. The Titanic's list is no longer subtle. It is visible now, measurable, the deck tilting forward and to the starboard in a way that cannot be explained away or ignored. The boats that remain on the davits are being loaded with increasing urgency and decreasing order. The passengers who have come to the boat deck late, the ones who did not believe, who waited in their cabins, who assumed that the ship's lights and the band's music and the presence of uniformed officers meant that everything was proceeding in a controlled and manageable fashion, find boats aurea, gone, or nearly gone, or being loaded in ways that seem to follow no principle they can identify. The stratification of the ship, established in its first hours, now performs its final function. The first-class passengers are on the upper decks, near the boats, in a language they understand, with stewards who know their names. The third-class passengers are below, in corridors that do not lead directly to the boat deck, in a language that is not being spoken to them, in a ship whose geography they have had no reason to learn. The difference in outcome will be, when the numbers are finally compiled, staggering in its precision. First-class women survive at a rate of nearly 97%. Third-class men survive at a rate of approximately 16%. The ship has not merely sunk, it has sunk in the exact shape of the society that built it. This is the Titanic's most devastating testimony. Not the iceberg, not the speed, not the insufficient lifeboats, but the way the disaster follows the social map of the ship with such fidelity that it seems almost designed. It is not designed. It is the accumulated consequence of 100 decisions made in normal times by people who were not thinking about disaster, who were thinking about commerce and comfort and the preferences of paying passengers and the requirements of immigration law. The ship was built for the world as it was. The world as it was could not save everyone equally. And so, it did not. The Titanic carries lifeboats for approximately half her complement of passengers and crew. This number meets the legal requirement of the time. The legal requirement was written when ships were smaller, when the assumption underlying the regulation was that lifeboats were supplementary to rescue. That, in an emergency, nearby vessels would arrive quickly enough that the lifeboats needed only to serve as a temporary measure, a bridge between the sinking ship and the rescue that was already on its way. The regulation has not been updated since the ships became large enough to make that assumption impossible. The ships have grown, the law has not. And the gap between them, which has existed for years as an abstraction, as a theoretical deficiency noted in committee rooms and then set aside, is now, at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning of April 15, 1912, fully and finally arrived. In the wireless room, Jack Phillips is transmitting. He has been transmitting for more than an hour. The call goes out in two forms: CQD, the older signal, the one that experienced operators recognize without hesitation, and SOS, the newer international code adopted at the Berlin Convention of 1906, and now, on this particular night, being used in something close to its first genuine emergency. Harold Bride, 22 years old, and Phillips's junior operator, sits beside him. The room is warm, the power is still full, and from the darkness of the North Atlantic, the answers are returning, one by one, each carrying a name and a position and a number that is the only number that matters now. The Frankfurt answers, she is 170 miles away. The Olympic answers, she is 500 miles. The Mount Temple answers, she is 49 miles, but there is ice between her and the Titanic, and her captain will decide, correctly, that he cannot push through it in darkness at speed. The Baltic answers, the Virginian answers, and then, at 12 minutes past midnight, the Carpathia answers. She is the RMS Carpathia, a Cunard liner out of New York, bound for the Mediterranean, carrying 740 passengers on what is, by any measure, a routine voyage. Her wireless operator, Harold Cottam, is still awake only because he has not yet removed his headphones. He had been waiting for a routine message and has instead received this. He takes down the Titanic's position. He takes it to the bridge. And there, on the bridge of the Carpathia, Captain Arthur Henry Rostron is about to make a decision that he will make in less than 30 seconds and will spend the rest of his life being asked about. The Carpathia is 58 miles from the Titanic's last reported position. At her normal cruising speed, that distance represents 4 hours. Rostron does not think in normal cruising speeds. He turns his ship. He orders every available boiler lit. He orders the heating to the passenger cabins cut off so that the steam can be redirected to the engines. He orders the ship's doctors to prepare. He orders rope ladders rigged along the hull and cargo nets and boatswain's chairs for those too weak to climb. He orders hot drinks prepared in quantity, coffee, soup, brandy. He orders the dining rooms cleared and readied for survivors. He orders all of this before the Carpathia has traveled a single mile toward the Titanic, because Rostron is not simply going fast. He is thinking ahead to a moment that has not yet arrived, organizing his ship around a rescue that exists, at this point, only as a coordinate and a distress call, and his own calculation of what he will find when he gets there. The Carpathia begins to move at 14 knots, then 15, then 17. She is a 12-knot ship. She has never done this before. Her engines are straining and her hull is vibrating, and the ice field she is driving through in complete darkness is the same ice field that the Titanic's officers noted and logged and set aside. Rostron posts additional lookouts. He reduces speed slightly when the ice thickens and increases it again when it clears. He is making the same essential decision that Captain Smith made hours earlier: speed through ice, justified by urgency. And the writer of history must sit with that discomfort rather than resolve it too quickly. The difference between them, in the end, is that Rostron's urgency is genuine, and his luck holds, and his ice field does not give him the one piece of ice at the one angle that the Titanic found. The line between heroism and recklessness is sometimes nothing more than outcome. Rostron knows this, or he will know it later, in the way that men who have been very lucky sometimes come to understand the texture of their luck. He drives on. The Carpathia drives on. And in the wireless room of the Titanic, Jack Phillips keeps sending. On the bridge of the Californian, the situation is different in almost every particular. The Californian is a cargo steamer, 12 days out of London, bound for Boston. Her captain, Stanley Lord, has stopped for the night. The ice that surrounds the Titanic surrounds the Californian as well, and Lord has made the prudent decision, the defensible, reasonable, professionally sound decision, to wait until morning rather than proceed in darkness through waters he cannot see clearly. He is not wrong to do this. He is, by the standards of his training and his experience, exactly right. At approximately 11:30 in the evening, his officers observe a ship on the horizon. They watch her lights. They try to contact her with the Morse lamp and receive no response they can interpret. At 12:40 in the morning, Officer Herbert Stone, on watch, observes what he will later describe as a white rocket fired from the direction of the distant ship. He watches. A second rocket. He calls Captain Lord on the telephone, tells him what he sees. Lord, who is resting, asks whether they are company signals. A common practice among merchant vessels, a way of identifying themselves to one another. Stone says he does not know. Lord tells him to keep watching and to let him know if anything changes. He goes back to rest. More rockets follow. 5 in total, observed from the Californian's bridge over the course of roughly an hour. The officers discuss what they see. They note that the distant ship appears to have changed position, or that her lights have changed character, or that she seems to be moving. They fit each observation into an explanation that does not require them to act. This is not callousness. This is not indifference. These are men looking at unfamiliar information in the middle of the night and doing what the human mind does naturally and almost inevitably, finding the interpretation that preserves the existing order of things, the one that does not require the world to be as catastrophic as the alternative XPSP, La Nation would demand. The horror of the Californian is not that her officers were cruel. It is that they were uncertain. And uncertainty, in this particular instance, at this particular hour, produces the same result as looking away. The 10 miles between the two ships remains 10 miles. It remains uncrossed. The one instrument aboard the Californian that could have collapsed that distance in seconds, the wireless, is silent, because Cyril Evans, the Californian's wireless operator, went to sleep at 11:30, shortly after the Titanic had sent him a brusque message telling him to stand by because she was busy with commercial traffic. Evans had been working all day. No regulation required him to maintain a continuous watch through the night. He removes his headphones, he goes to sleep, he does not hear the CQD, he does not hear the SOS, he does not hear anything at all. In the water, 1,500 people are hearing everything. They are hearing the cold, which is to say, they are hearing what cold does to a body when the body can no longer resist it. The shortening breath, the slowing thought, the strange warmth that is not warmth. The temperature of the North Atlantic on this night is 28 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees below the freezing point of fresh water. A person in water of this temperature survives, on average, for fewer than 15 minutes before the cold reaches the organs that cannot afford to be reached. The lifeboats are out there in the darkness. 710 people are in them. Most of the boats have room for more. Most do not go back. The reasons are various and human and not easily reduced to cowardice. The fear of being swamped, the fear of being grabbed by the drowning, the paralysis that comes from a kind of grief so total and so sudden that the mind cannot yet process what it is being asked to do. Some boats do return. Lifeboat 14, under 5th Officer Harold Lowe, who has redistributed its passengers among other boats and waited until the cries in the water have diminished, goes back and pulls 4 people from the sea. 4. The cries in the water, those in the lifeboats will later say, diminish over perhaps 20 minutes. And then the ocean is quiet. On the deck, in the last minutes before the stern rises, the band is playing. This detail has become almost mythological, and it has earned that status. Not because it is sentimental, not because it flatters us with the image of human dignity in extremity, but because it is true, and because what it is true about is important. Wallace Hartley and his 7 musicians are not performing courage in any theatrical sense. They are not making a statement. They are doing the thing that is available to them, the only thing, and they are doing it continuously and without apparent hesitation. And that continuity, that refusal to stop, that persistence in the one form of usefulness left open to them, is its own kind of argument about how people behave. All other options have closed. They play ragtime. They play hymns. Whether they play Nearer My God to Thee at the end, as survivors will later say, or something else entirely, the music continues. It continues until it does not. None of the 8 men survived the night. In the wireless room, the power is beginning to fluctuate. The ship's stern is rising as the bow descends, and the angle is now steep enough that walking requires effort, that standing requires thought. Phillips is still at the key. He is transmitting the position. He is transmitting the call. Bride, beside him, has been told by Captain Smith that they have done their duty and may look to themselves. Phillips keeps sending. This is not a dramatic gesture. It is simply what he does, what he has been trained to do, what his hands know to do when they're at the key and the key is functioning. He keeps sending because the sending is the thing and the thing is not finished. At 2:17 in the morning, Jack Phillips sends his last transmission. Harold Bride, beside him, will later say that Phillips simply kept sending until the power failed. The wireless room goes dark. The sea is 3 minutes away. Phillips will not survive. He makes it into the water and onto an overturned collapsible lifeboat. And he dies there of exposure before the Carpathia arrives. He is 25 years old. Bride survives, his feet badly frostbitten, and he will sit at the Carpathia's wireless key for the entirety of the voyage to New York, sending the names of the survivors, because the world is waiting and he is the one who can do it. The Carpathia arrives at 2:45 in the morning, 45 minutes after the Titanic has gone. Rostron finds the boats in the first grey light. He finds the wreckage. He finds the water, quiet now, which contains what it contains. The rescue takes 4 hours. One by one, the boats come alongside. The rope ladders go down. The cargo nets go down. The hot drinks are waiting. The doctors are waiting. 710 people come aboard. The Carpathia turns south and then west, and the North Atlantic receives what the North Atlantic has taken, and the ship moves toward New York in a silence that is not peaceful, but is, at least, no longer urgent. And in the wake of everything that has happened, in the legislative chambers and the inquiry rooms and the offices of the Board of Trade, the gap that Cyril Evans's sleeping headphones represent will be examined and measured, and finally, at last, closed. The reform will come. It will come clearly and directly and without significant opposition, because the cost of the gap has been made so legible that no one can look away from it. Every passenger vessel above a certain size will henceforth be required to maintain a continuous wireless watch, 24 hours a day, every voyage. An operator will be awake on every ship. The 10 miles between the Californian and the Titanic will never again be 10 silent miles. This is the most direct and traceable legislative consequence of this specific night. One requirement, one gap, one reform, drawn in a straight line from the darkness of the North Atlantic to the language of the law. It will save lives. It is already saving them in the future that has not yet arrived, in the ships that will call for help and be heard. This is the nature of reform built on catastrophe. It arrives precisely calibrated to the disaster that produced it, fitted exactly to the shape of the wound. It does not imagine the next wound. It cannot. No system can. Systems look backward. That is not a failure of systems. It is their nature, their honest and unavoidable nature, and understanding that nature clearly is perhaps the most useful thing the darkness of April 15th has to teach. The Carpathia moves south. The ocean is very large, and somewhere in it, 2.5 miles below the surface, settling slowly into the silt of the Atlantic floor, the Titanic arrives at the place where she will remain. At approximately 2017, in the morning of April 15, 1912, the stern of the Titanic rises from the water. Those in the lifeboats watch it go up. A wall of black steel against the stars, the propellers lifting clear of the ocean, enormous and still, dripping, turning slowly in the cold air as though they might yet find purchase in something. The angle increases. The stern climbs. And the sound that accompanies this is a sound that survivors will spend the rest of their lives trying to describe and never quite manage. Not because language fails them, though it does, but because the sound is not one sound. It is every sound at once. Everything loose aboard the ship slides forward at the same moment. China and silver and luggage and machinery and the contents of 1,000 cabins, the accumulated cargo of a civilization in transit. And beneath all of that, the deep structural groan of the hull itself, the sound of something enormous, ours failing under its own weight. The sound of steel giving way to forces it was never designed to meet. Survivors call it a roar. They call it a rumble. They call it something they have no word for. One woman says it is like the end of the world and then immediately corrects herself because the end of the world is not something she has heard before, and this she has. The lifeboats sit perhaps 200 yards distant. Some are farther. The water between them and the ship is black and calm and very cold, and the people in the boats are looking up at something that fills the sky above them, blotting out the stars along one horizon. The stern is perhaps 170 feet tall. It rises to perhaps 80 degrees before the final sequence begins. The hull has been separating for some time before this. The bow section, already flooded, already descending, has been pulling at the stern from beneath the waterline and the keel. The spine of the ship, the structural element that holds the two halves in relation to each other, gives way somewhere between the third and fourth funnels. This is not visible from the lifeboats. What is visible is the effect. The stern, freed from the drag of the bow, falls back momentarily, settles almost level on the water, rotates slightly on its axis. There is a pause. It is not a long pause. It is the pause of something gathering itself for a final act, though of course it gathers nothing. It simply fills. The sea enters the open stern from below and above, and from every available direction, and the stern begins its own descent. And from the lifeboats, those watching see it go. Not dramatically, not in the manner of films that will be made about this night, but quietly, with a kind of terrible effigy. NC, the steel slipping below the surface with a finality that is almost administrative. The time from the rising of the stern to the disappearance of the ship is fewer than 4 minutes. The narration does not amplify this. 4 minutes is already unbearable. The bow section is already gone. It has been plunging for minutes, moving through the water at a speed that will compress it when it meets the ocean floor, crumpling the forecastle inward, scattering its contents across a debris field that will eventually cover 2 square miles of the Atlantic bottom. It reaches the floor at a speed that leaves a crater in the silt. It will be found, decades later, largely intact from the bridge backward, the front of it destroyed by impact, the name on the anchor still legible. The stern settles 2,500 feet away, in pieces, the internal structure having collapsed during its own descent, the decks pancaking into each other under the weight of the water pressing in. The two sections come to rest 2.5 miles below the surface, in darkness so complete and pressure so total that nothing human can follow them there without extraordinary protection, and even then only briefly. They will remain there. They will remain there longer than anyone now alive will live. Then the water. Then the 1500. The temperature of the North Atlantic on this night is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. This is 4 degrees below the freezing point of fresh water. The sea does not freeze because salt water requires lower temperatures to do so, but the human body does not know this distinction. What the human body knows is cold, and what cold of this magnitude does to a body is not gradual. The muscles of the chest begin to seize almost immediately. Breathing becomes difficult, then agonizing, then impossible. The heart, attempting to maintain core temperature, withdraws circulation from the extremities. The hands, the feet, the arms, and the extremities stop functioning within minutes. A person in water of 28 degrees Fahrenheit loses consciousness in 15 minutes or fewer. Death follows shortly after. More than 1,500 people are in the water. The arithmetic is not complicated. It is simply unacceptable, and it proceeds regardless. The lifeboats are close. This is the fact that the narration must sit with, because it is the fact that the survivors will sit with for the remainder of their lives. The lifeboats are close. They carry 710 people in spaces rated for more. The cries of those in the water reach the boats clearly in the still air, because there is no wind, because the night is calm, because the conditions that made the iceberg difficult to see also make the sound carry perfectly across the flat, dark water. The people in the lifeboats hear everything. They hear the 1500. They hear the names being called. They hear the prayers in languages they do not know. They hear the children. Most of the boats do not return. The reasons for this are not simple, and the narration does not reach for simplicity. Some of those in command of the boats fear being swamped. A lifeboat, approached by a large number of desperate people in the water, can be capsized, and those already in it will die alongside those they attempted to rescue. This is a real fear. It has a real basis. It is also, in the case of many of the boats, a fear applied to a situation that does not quite warrant it. Several boats are so lightly loaded that the swamping concern is nearly theoretical. The number of survivors they carry so far below capacity that returning for even a dozen more would not have. Threatened their stability. But fear does not operate on theoretical grounds. Fear operates on what it knows and what it imagines, and on the night of April 15, 1912, the people in the lifeboats know very little and imagine a great deal. Some are simply paralyzed. The event has exceeded the capacity of their minds to process it in real time, and what looks from the outside like a decision is in fact the absence of one. An inability to act in the face of something so far outside the available categories of experience that the decision-making apparatus simply stops. This is not cowardice. It is not, precisely, anything that has a name. It is what happens when a system built for the world as it has always been encounters the world as it has, on this one night, decided to be. Fifth Officer Harold Lowe returns. He is 28 years old, and he is the only officer who takes a lifeboat back into the debris field. And he does so after waiting for the cries to diminish, waiting for the number of living people in the water to decrease so that the risk to those already in his boat is reduced. He finds 4 people alive. He finds many more who are not. The delay that makes his return possible is also the delay that makes it nearly pointless, and Lowe understands this and carries it with him, and it is not possible to know what that understanding weighs. J. Bruce Ismay is in a lifeboat. He is the managing director of the White Star Line, the man whose company owns the ship, the man whose ambitions have shaped its construction and its crossing. He steps into collapsible sea as it is being lowered, at a moment when no women or children are visible on deck in his immediate vicinity. He rows, it is said, with his back to the ship, and does not watch it go. He survives. He is among the 710. The narration sets this down without commentary, because the commentary is not needed. Ismay's survival will become, in the days and weeks and years that follow, the surface onto which a civilization projects its need for a villain. The owner of the ship, in a lifeboat, while 1,500 people drown. The image arranges itself almost automatically into a moral tableau, a symbol of the powerful preserving themselves at the expense of those who had no power, and the symbol is not entirely wrong. Whether it is entirely right is a different question. Whether Ismay made a decision in those final moments that was genuinely culpable, or whether he did what any person might do in the confusion and darkness of a deck emptying of women and children, is not a question that resolves cleanly. What the narration knows is that he lived, and 1,500 did not, and that his living will follow him for the rest of his life with a persistence that constitutes its own kind of verdict, whatever the formal inquiries may say. Thomas Andrews is not in a lifeboat. He is last seen in the first-class smoking room, standing before a painting of Plymouth Harbor, his life jacket on the back of a chair beside him. He has done everything he can do. He has calculated the damage and reported it accurately. He has warped the ship and urged passengers into lifeboats and helped women with their children and worked with the calm efficiency of a man who understands precisely what is happening and is determined to be useful until usefulness is no longer possible. He has known since perhaps 1 a.m. that there is no version of this night in which he leaves the ship. He stands before the painting of Plymouth Harbor, and those who see him say he does not appear to be afraid. They say he appears to be thinking. His estimate has been confirmed to the minute. The collision occurs at 11:40 in the evening of April 14th. Andrews tells Captain Smith and tells others that the ship will sink in perhaps 2 hours. The ship sinks at 2020 in the morning of April 15th. This is 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision. It is, within any reasonable margin, exactly as Andrews predicted. The man who understood the ship completely, who could read her hull and her compartments and her waterline with a precision that no one else aboard possessed, was right about everything. He was right about the flooding. He was right about the compartments. He was right about the mathematics of what the sea would do and when and in what order. He was right about everything except the one thing that would have mattered. And that thing was not mathematics. It was not engineering. It was a decision made hours earlier, in the early evening of a calm, dark Sunday on the North Atlantic, by men who had good reasons for the decision they made, and no reason yet to doubt those reasons. It was the speed. It was the ice warnings set aside. It was the precedent of ships that had steamed through ice fields before and arrived safely, and the reasonable inference that this ship, on this night, would do the same. Andrews could calculate the flooding. He could not calculate the confidence. No instrument existed for that. No instrument exists for that still. The screaming begins almost immediately after the ship goes under. It is a sound unlike the sound of the ship breaking. That was mechanical, structural, the voice of material under stress. This is human, and it carries across the water to the lifeboats with a clarity that the cold air sharpens rather than softens. Survivors will say, in testimony and in letters and in conversations they have decades later, that the sound is the thing they cannot leave behind. Not the sight of the stern rising, not the darkness, not the cold, the sound. The sound of 1,500 people in 28-degree water understanding, all at once, that the ship is gone and the boats are not coming and the Carpathia is 58 miles away and the cold is already doing what cold does. The sound continues for some time. It does not continue for as long as those in the lifeboats will later feel that it did, because time, on this night, does not move at its ordinary rate. It moves at the rate of the body under extreme stress, which is to say, it moves very slowly and then, without warning, very fast. The cries diminish not because the situation resolves, but because the cold resolves it. One by one, and then in groups, and then all at once the voices stop, and the North Atlantic, which has been the loudest place on Earth for the last several minutes, becomes very quiet. The Titanic reaches the floor of the Atlantic at approximately 2002 in the morning, settling in two pieces, 2,500 feet apart in the darkness, 2.5 miles below the surface. The ocean closes over her. The screaming, which has been continuous since the ship went under, begins to thin and then to stop, and then the North Atlantic is quiet in a way it has not been for hours, and the silence is the worst sound of all. It is the silence of a question that has been asked and answered. It is the silence that follows the end of an argument that no one wanted to have and no one can now walk back from. It is the silence of the lifeboats drifting in the dark, and the stars above them unchanged, indifferent, ancient, burning with the same steady light they have always burned with and will burn with long after this night and every night like it has been forgotten. It is the silence of a world that was, an hour ago, fully confident in itself and is now something else, something that does not yet have a name, because the naming will take years and the understanding will take longer and some part of it will never be completed at all. The boats drift. The cold holds. The Carpathia is still coming, driving south through the ice at speeds her engines were never designed to sustain. Her captain standing watch on the bridge, her passengers awake and preparing blankets and hot drinks for survivors they have not yet seen. She is still an hour away. The people in the lifeboats do not know this with certainty. They know only that they are alive, and that the water around them is full of the dead, and that the ship that brought them here is gone, and that the darkness will not last forever, even if on this particular morning it feels very much as though it will. Somewhere in the debris field, a deck chair turns slowly in the current. A child's shoe. A letter, still sealed, addressed to someone in New York who is at this moment asleep and does not yet know that the world they will wake to is different from the world they went to sleep in. The stars do not move. The ocean does not mourn. The silence continues, enormous and complete, and inside it, very quietly, the long work of understanding what happened here and why, and what it means, and whether meaning is even the right category, begins.